The NFL draft takes second place to really the best draft there is this spring. The Big Ten TV draft. Is your favorite team going to be playing on Fox, CBS, or NBC a majority of the time this season? I'm going to predict all of the games that end up in those three big time slots on those three networks throughout the Big Ten 24 football season.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
So this is a big puzzle that you got to try to put together, and you're putting the puzzle together, and it's hard to put it together because we don't really know all of the rules. All of the rules are maybe not publicly known because we don't know exactly to the T what the rules are as it pertains to this Big Ten TV draft that went on last week. We got an idea. From my understanding, Fox will pick about their handful of games that they have. They invest the most money into the conference, so they get to pick a handful of games right off the top, about 6 to 8 games. And then CBS and NBC will kind of alternate. FS1, Peacock, and the Big Ten Network will be thrown in after that as well. Now, when you're putting this puzzle together, you got to keep in mind some of these other rules. West Coast home games will not be on Big Noon. So if you have a game at Husky Stadium, Autzen Stadium, the Rose Bowl, or the LA Coliseum, they will not be having a 9 a.m. local kickoff. So that adds extra value to those big games on the West Coast for networks like CBS and for networks like NBC in those time slots as well. So those big noon games on Fox are reserved for the games in the maybe traditional Big Ten footprint. We found out last year Fox wants to go hard into the paint when it comes to Colorado. They had Oklahoma and Cincinnati on a big noon game as well. So every single game is probably not going to be a Big Ten game in the big noon kickoff slot. Big 12 games. Now, there's not going to be a ton, okay? But Big 12 games, there are going to be a few that might take up that big noon slot as well. So then you got to shift around some kickoff times. Here's yet another curveball. Friday night primetime football on Fox. From what I understand, the top 3 games of the week will be on Saturday. But that may not always be the case. Once again, this is a little bit of an unknown. This year, with the new Big 12, with the new Big 10, and all of these TV deals kind of colliding now with all of this realignment, this is really the first year where we're really going to find out how exactly these pieces fit into the puzzle. All of that being considered, I'm going to skip week 1 because there's really no significant Big Ten home games. You got Penn State traveling to West Virginia. That could be a candidate for the very first Friday night game on Fox. USC and LSU on that Sunday is going to be on ABC down there in Las Vegas. So I'm going to skip ahead to week number 2, and this is where we're going to start. I'm at least going to get one pick right. Texas and Michigan has already been confirmed as the big noon game on this particular week, which opens the door to some pretty good matchups, I think, for both CBS and NBC. Now, it may not be the number 1 pick for the Peacock. I'll get to that in just a little bit down the road here in this commentary, but Nebraska and Colorado, I think, is going to be pretty high up on the list. I have this one going on Big Ten Saturday night on NBC. Man, what a atmosphere that will be in prime time. Going from Texas and Michigan to Alabama and Wisconsin back to back, that just seems like something Fox would do. Remember, I think it was a few years back, they did Texas and Alabama. They followed it up with Nebraska and Oklahoma. They're going to, I think, want to put 2 Big Ten SEC matchups together in back-to-back weeks. So the Crimson Tide go into Madison. I've got that one on Big Noon as well. I think Notre Dame. There's a few Notre Dame road games. They're going to go at Purdue. They're going to go at USC. I think those are going to be pretty high commodities for these networks considering the reach that Notre Dame has. I have CBS kind of holding on to this one between the Irish and the Boilermakers, a rivalry rekindled between those two Indiana schools. Now, last year the Apple Cup was in Seattle. Next year it's going to be in Pullman. This year it's at Lumen Field, home of the Seattle Seahawks. We're not 100% sure exactly who owns the rights to this game. But for the sake of this, we're going to throw this one on NBC. USC in their very first Big Ten Conference game, traveling to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Once again, this is just another game that reeks of a big noon game. When you look at those top 6 to 8 picks that Fox would make, this seems to be one that's got a lot of storylines around it. Two pretty solid teams going at it early in the season. How about the Floyd of Rosedale game? This is the earliest that the pig has been on the line. And rivalries mean something. You're going to see that as we trickle on down this list. If Illinois is able to beat Kansas, if Nebraska is able to beat Colorado, I think this Illini and Huskers game could pop a little bit. Ohio State and Michigan State in the 3:30 Eastern window on Fox, because I believe this is maybe the first week that you're going to see a Big 12 game in the big noon slot. Colorado will travel to Orlando to take on UCF. UCF, if they can beat TCU, is expected to be a 3-0 team. Gus Malzahn, KJ Jefferson at quarterback for the Knights. You look at Colorado, at worst they could maybe be sitting there at 2-2 at this point in time with only one Big 12 loss. So it could be a fairly big early season matchup in the Big 12. We know how Fox went in on multiple consecutive Colorado games last season, so I think they're going to move that game up to the big noon slot. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for Fox to get in on the Ohio State bandwagon later on in the season. So Ohio State and Michigan State ends up in the 3:30 Eastern slot. I could also see that game being moved to the Friday night on Fox time slot as well. I think these networks, CBS and NBC, I think they're going to want to get into broadcast at the Rose Bowl. And that's why I have Oregon and UCLA in here, maybe rather than Michigan and Minnesota. This is an early season conference matchup for the Oregon Ducks. It is an early opportunity for a big network to get them and their fan base on television as well. Wisconsin traveling to LA to take on the USC Trojans. I think networks are going to be very intrigued, and I think all the viewers are going to be intrigued of seeing these traditional Big Ten teams against some of these West Coast teams. Wisconsin on the field at the Coliseum and USC, that's kind of a clash that we're going to start to see more often that we haven't seen. People maybe seen something for the first time will draw people in to that Saturday night time slot on NBC. We talked about Ohio State and the opportunity for Fox to maybe get in a Colorado game early, but also have the opportunity to go to Columbus, Ohio, which may be the best team and best roster in the country. This is that opportunity. Iowa at Ohio State. Michigan at Washington, a rematch of last year's national championship. I'm not sure how high it will be on the list considering how much the Wolverines and the Huskies have lost and how different these teams look this year, but I think just having a rematch of the national championship from last season is going to be a pretty valuable product for some of these networks. I got that one sliding over to the NBC slot, and Michigan State at Oregon. There's a lot of familiar storylines in here. Jonathan Smith, an early Big Ten matchup going back to Autzen Stadium to take on the Oregon Ducks. Colorado plays a pretty big game this particular week. The Kansas State Wildcats, who are probably one of the most talented teams in the Big 12, go to Colorado. Even if the Buffs can't get it done against UCF, I still think this is a game that garners a lot of attention at this point in the season. So I see Fox moving this one up into the big noon slot, and that bumps Washington at Iowa to the 3:30 Eastern slot on Fox. Ohio State at Oregon. It will be the number one pick for CBS. I'll get to the number one pick for NBC here in just a minute. It is a gigantic matchup, and CBS does some of the best production in the business. You get chills just thinking about it. Hearing that theme music and the flyover at Autzen Stadium. A pretty good consolation prize throughout this week. Penn State going to USC on Big Ten Saturday night. After an absolute banger of a Week 7, Week 8 maybe drops off a little bit, but maybe I shouldn't use the word drop off. Maybe there are some teams lying in the weeds where you have USC having a big game the week before. Oregon having a big game the week before. And maybe these teams are lying in the weeds. All of those teams that had big games, they got to go on the road the very next week to some hungry teams on national television. There's a possibility for Colorado at Arizona here, but I think maybe the Buffs will have taken a few L's on the chin at this point. And just like last year, right, maybe some other storylines within college football start to take over after the Buffs lose 2, 3, 4 games at this point in the season. So I've got Oregon traveling to Purdue. This will especially be a big game if the Ducks are able to get the big win over Ohio State. Watch out, Trojans. USC traveling all the way across the country to take on a Maryland team with a pretty good defense. If they get it figured out at quarterback, this could be an upset alert type of situation for the Trojans, depending on where both teams sit in the Big Ten standings and record-wise at this point during the season. Michigan at Illinois in the prime time slot as well. The Illini trying to get revenge after that 2022 game. Week 9 is maybe one of the best slate of games when you talk about a top 3, maybe across the entire season. When you look at those cluster of games that Fox is going to want to sign up for right away on Big Noon, Nebraska at Ohio State is a prime candidate. These are two fan bases that attract nationwide. And when you look at Nebraska's schedule early in the season, you look at games against Colorado, you look at games against Indiana and Rutgers and teams like that, it's a fairly light first half of the year for Nebraska. They could be 7-0 realistically at this point. And if Ohio State is also undefeated, this could be a giant type of matchup. So Fox, I think, is going to want to pick this one and keep this one all to themselves. Rivalry games, the Paul Bunyan Trophy in Ann Arbor, Michigan State at Michigan I've got in the CBS slot as well. Penn State at Wisconsin is a pretty good third pick. You talk about week 9 being good, week 10 maybe takes it to a different level. I've been starting these with Fox. I'm going to start this with NBC because I think this is the number 1 pick for NBC. Folks, we need to speak it into existence. The whiteout, Ohio State at Penn State. I think this has the opportunity to become a whiteout game at night on NBC because of what Fox has the ability to pick. Oregon at Michigan in the first week of November has the potential to have Big Ten championship implications. This is a choice that Fox will have to make this particular week. They can only pick one. In this scenario, they're picking the Ducks and the Wolverines to go on Big Noon kickoff as well. There is going to be some horse trading kind of going on behind the scenes between these networks as well. You got to imagine NBC every year is probably going to get the Penn State whiteout game. I know CBS got it last year when they were flexing some things around when they had a night game side by side with Ohio State and Notre Dame. But now that all 3 of these networks are fully entrenched into the TV deal this year, I don't think there's going to be a lot of that happening. Every network is going to follow their time slot from here on out. So NBC is going to want to lock in, especially with Todd Blackledge being the lead color commentator for NBC. You got to imagine that they're going to want to lock into the whiteout game every year. And with all due respect to teams like Iowa and Minnesota, I think NBC wants to have that big game, that big brand in the whiteout. Teams like a USC, like an Oregon, like a Michigan, like an Ohio State. And the battle for the Heartland Trophy between Wisconsin and Iowa slides right in there to the mid-afternoon on CBS. That is as good as it gets when you talk about a TV lineup. It's one of those days, plop your butt on the couch and don't move for 12 hours. Let's move on to week number 11. We start to get down the stretch. We're in the month of November. We want some of these big-time teams that are going to be in the Big Ten championship race. We've got Purdue traveling to Ohio State on Big Noon kickoff. Oregon is likely going to be in the Big Ten championship race, hosting Maryland at Autzen Stadium in Eugene. Penn State is probably going to be in the mix. Who knows? Maybe Washington could be a surprise team. You got those two in the mid-afternoon over there on CBS. Moving on to week number 12. This is a pretty solid week as well. Oregon at Wisconsin could maybe be towards the tail end of those top picks. For Fox, Nebraska at USC is one that was maybe rumored to be on a Fox Friday night time slot, but CBS, I think. Those are two well-known brands, and those are two teams that could be dark horses maybe in the Big Ten championship race at this point in time, maybe sitting in the 3, 4, 5 slot at that point. And then Penn State traveling to Purdue. We saw that game to kick off the season a few years ago. Purdue can put on a hell of a night game atmosphere with that black and gold. If Wisconsin or Nebraska really maybe exceed expectations and are in the hunt at this point in time, I could see the Badgers and the Huskers trumping maybe some Big 12 games this week as the big noon game. But as of right now, I'm going to say Badgers and Huskers go into the 3:30 Eastern window, because when you look at some of these Big 12 games that week, you got Colorado at Kansas, Texas Tech at Oklahoma State, Iowa State at Utah. Those are some matchups that are probably going to determine, especially this late in the season, who goes to Arlington for the Big 12 championship. So I'm going to say Fox adopts the Big 12 this week for the final time in some of those Big 12 races coming on down the stretch. So you got Badgers and Huskers sliding into the 3:30 Eastern window as well. Rivalries are very important. For the second time, CBS heads to the Rose Bowl for the Trojans and the Bruins, and then the George DeWitt Trophy on the line in primetime when Northwestern takes on the Michigan Wolverines. Rivalry weekend. We wait for it. We live for it at the beginning of every season. And from now until the sun explodes, Michigan and Ohio State will be the big noon kickoff game on Fox. No question that's going to be their number one pick here in 2024. So that's definitely going to be a Gus and Joel called game. Now, I think this pick for CBS this week, Notre Dame at USC, I believe that could be a contest. That could be maybe the number 2 draft pick for CBS. We talked about Ohio State and Oregon earlier. This game has nationwide appeal. We talk about the fan base that Notre Dame has. You look at USC. This is, I think, a pretty high value for CBS and NBC. I have it going the way of CBS. And then Washington at Oregon late in the season. Big Ten Saturday night on NBC. Can the Ducks wrap it up and maybe punch their ticket to Indianapolis? There could be a lot of stakes between the Ducks and the Huskies. And Oregon, right, hasn't fared as well against Washington the last couple of years. So there's storylines aplenty in Eugene. Well, there's a high likelihood that a lot of these could be wrong, but I did the best I could with the information that I had, considering that a lot of people really don't know exactly what the format is for the TV draft, and a lot of realignment and a lot of moving puzzle pieces. And this year, we're really going to find out where those pieces are going to go consistently. Last year, they unveiled these matchups at the end of May. So we should find out whether I'm right or wrong on some of these matchups here pretty soon. What do you think? Would you like to see some other games maybe go in some different slots on some different networks? Do you maybe want to see some other teams featured on these big 3 networks a little bit more? Leave your thoughts, all things Big Ten television, in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.